The opinions expressed on this program are solely those of its hosts, guests, or callers, and do not necessarily represent the opinions of WTBR-FM, its management, other producers, or sponsors.
Hi, everyone. You're listening to Backstory. Let's hear it on WTBR-FM Pittsville with Roberta McCulloch-Dews. Thanks for tuning in. So today we have with us Dr. Frances Jones-Sneed. And Dr. Jones-Sneed, for the few who may not know who she is, it's my pleasure to really give a little background on Dr. Jones-Sneed. She is one of Berkshire County's living treasures, and it's my privilege to have this conversation with her today. Dr. Jones-Sneed is a professor emeritus of history at Massachusetts College of Liberal Arts. She's the co-director of the Upper Housatonic Valley African American Heritage Trail. She was a 2008 NEH Fellow at the W.E.B. Du Bois Institute at Harvard University, and she is a 2022 recipient of the Massachusetts Governor's Award in the Humanities. Now, this list is a very short list. I could go on, and there's so much more to talk about, but I want you all to hear from Dr. Jones-Sneed today because we're going to have a really great conversation. So, Dr. Jones-Sneed, welcome, and thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much, Roberta. I love your show, and I love what you're doing.
Thank you. So I just have to tell you a quick personal story, and I don't think I've ever shared this with you. When we first moved to the Berkshires 14 years ago, I remember reading a news article and you were featured in it. And I thought to myself, my goodness, this is a powerhouse woman. And I would love to meet her one day. And, little did I know that our paths would cross in so many ways over the years. And I just have to publicly say that it has been a personal privilege of mine to observe and take note of your dedication to history, most notably the preservation of Black history and the experience here in the Berkshire. So that's just a personal story that I just needed to share with you because it's just amazing how life happens and brings you closer to the people you admire.
Yeah, well, I'm really glad that we got to know each other, Roberta, and that you're on the bandwagon for helping out doing what I call my life's work.
All right. So Dr. Jones-Sneed, your love of history, I should say, goes back to your time growing up in Kosciuszko, Mississippi. And I just want to give kudos to myself for saying that right. But it was there that you watched your 11th grade teacher, social studies teacher, Howard Lloyd, and he delivered powerful lessons on history. And I want to know, what was it about his teaching that resonated with you so much?
Mr. Lloyd stepped outside of the box. You have to understand that I grew up in the segregated South, in the Jim Crow South. I went to an all-Black high school. And in our 11th grade social studies class, we were supposed to be studying the history of Mississippi. And if you've heard the stories, Black kids in Black schools only got, the used books from, the white schools. And so we didn't have any new books or anything. And I just remember that we came to the section about the Civil War and Reconstruction. And there was about maybe one page discussing the Civil War and Reconstruction. And of course, it was told from the point of view of the South and white Southerners. And Mr. Lloyd just stopped and said, I think that we're going to do something different. Well, Lerone Bennett Jr., who worked for Ebony, had just published his book called Before the Mayflower, which was a popular African-American history book. Mr. Lloyd went into his meager pocket, because I don't know how, the man must have been making maybe $4,000 or $5,000 a year. That was it. Mm-hmm. He bought all 20 plus students in the class a copy of that book. And for the rest of the semester, that's what we read for him, is Lerone Bennett Jr.'s Before the Mayflower. And so, I liked history before then, but, his the way that he did it, the way that he kind of stepped outside the box. Number one, he came out of his pocket to pay for it. Number two, he went against the prevailing powers that be, because had the superintendent of the school, who was white, had found out that this was what he was doing, he probably would have been fired. So I just think that we were so blessed to have him as a teacher, and to think that he would say, this is what I want to do for you. This is something I want to give to you, my Black students. And so from that, I continue to meet other teachers and professors who are also giving of themselves and wanted to give something back. And so I I got it from my own Christian upbringing in my own household, my father and mother. But then on the professional side, that gave me a whole nother push that I should not only be just giving back for, doing good in the community, but
Yeah.
also trying to leave something or to teach something that did not exist, open people's mind to things that were lost, buried, or strayed, as it were. And that was African American history. So I thank
Mm.
Mr. Lloyd really for doing that sacrifice for us.
It makes me your story of Mr. Lloyd reminds me of individuals who I call them seed planters,
Mhm.
that they plant seeds and they may not necessarily be around to see the harvest of those seeds, but they are very diligent about planting those seeds, because they know at some point, at some time, they're going to ripen, and they're going to blossom, and they're going to do wonderful things. And you are benefiting. You are a seed that Mr. Lloyd he cultivated, and look what all the good that you have done. Dr. Jones-Sneed, when I think about Mississippi, I think about the tumultuous and distressing historical events related to that state. It's really hard to sometimes move past that. And when I hear of people who grew up in Mississippi, especially at the time that you did, could you tell me a little bit what it was like on a really personal level to live out that experience? Because we hear about it in textbooks, but when you have lived it, it's very different. Can you just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think that, people who lived that experience really didn't know. We didn't, growing up, I didn't know how bad it was. I didn't learn how bad it was growing up in Mississippi until I left Mississippi, when people say, "Oh, you're from Mississippi, how horrible that it is," because I grew up in a very protected society, between my home, my church, and my school. The Black community was so cemented around their young people to make sure that their young people learned as much as they could about themselves, and then moved on to do other kinds of things. My father protected my mother and I from the white society that we lived in. He did all of the shopping. He would never let us come into any contact with whites in the stores or in the grocery stores or any kind of thing like that. He was the face of our family. And I think that that was the way that the community was in a large extent, I just remember some of the boys that I grew up with in high school. They used to cross the border between the Black and white communities, and they would get into fights with the white guys. And I just remember how horrible I thought that was, and why were they fighting together? Why would they fight these white boys? Because of course we had the stories of Emmett Till and how Emmett Till had been killed. And so that was always something lurking in the back of our minds, that there was always this white threat at the door, and as long as you were quote unquote in your place, that things would be just fine, and I didn't figure out until I went to college that things weren't fine at all. Some of the kinds of stuff that my father and other adults had to deal with in order that I was safe and my friends were safe in that kind of way.
How did they process that, Dr. Jones-Sneed? Because, to deal with indignities over time, it, on a human level, it erodes something, it takes something away. So how did the elders in the community, especially people like your father, how did they still manage to be and exist with joy? Where did they find that joy?
They found it in their religion. The church was such a great part of that. My father was a deacon in the church. And we were at church like 3 and 4 times a week because of our commitment. I was in every kind of, club that the church had to offer in the school. They also had a Christian kind of society. It was the high Y and the tri-high Y clubs in that kind of way. So we had clubs within the school. And so in the Black community, whenever they left that white society, coming back in the community, that's where they found their strength, and especially within the Black church,
Mm,
I think, because they were the leaders, they were the ones who called the shots, and
mhm.
they were the ones that made the decisions about what was happening within the Black community. As an example, I didn't know when in senior year, a group of my class, a group of students actually, was just not my class, walked out to go down and protest at the local movie theater because the I guess I just should call it the white movie theater, because there were two theaters in town. There was a white movie theater and there was a Black movie theater. And the white movie theater allowed Blacks to come in, but we had to sit upstairs.
Yeah.
And so they were going down to protest, to integrate or desegregate this theater. And so I didn't go because I knew that my parents would have, just pitched a fit if I had left school to go down and do this. But they
Hmm.
went down to do this protest. Well, they cut off the superintendent and the powers that be, who are all white in this small town of 7,000 folk, cut off the water and the lights at the high school so that we didn't have any water and any lights. And so the the undertaker in town was one of the leading Black citizens. And that the same thing happened in Booker T. Washington form, that there was always someone in the Black community that the whites kind of came to and said, get your folks in order. And
Hmm.
so that's what they did. They said, get your folks in order. And so this guy bent to the wishes of the white society. And my father told me later that a number of Blacks, really disliked that. And so they pulled their insurance policies from this funeral home in protest.
Yeah.
Say, we didn't like what you did because you didn't talk to us, and we didn't come to a common decision about what we should do about this thing. You took
Hmm.
this on your own, and you bent to the wishes of the whites, white power structure, and we didn't like that. And
Yeah.
I said, and I must have been a sophomore or junior in college when my father told me that. And I said, whoa, Dad, I didn't know that you did that, because I thought he was, a very conservative guy, and, by the book and things like that. But no, he
Hmm.
was not at all. There was a line that he would just not cross,
Hmm.
and a line that even when the police would pull us over and come and talk to him, that was just a line that he wouldn't, they want to look in the trunk or stuff like that. He says no. And
Hmm.
my mother and I would look at each other like, what is he doing?
Yeah.
But there was just a line that he would not cross. And there were a lot of men like him within the Black society there. So,
I that right there, it makes me think about just the amount of strength and courage that these individuals, folks like your dad, had to have had, because we know that the external power structure didn't necessarily support that kind of agency,
no,
right?
no.
And in the event that you were arrested or worse, you didn't necessarily have the protections of the government to support you. So it's so when I hear stories like that, I think about bravery, I think about the courage, and I think about in the face and against a backdrop of so much indignity, how people found their strength in small and big ways, like your dad. Um, so you have this, I would say, this backdrop of growing resistance, right? You're seeing things, and as you move on to college, you stayed in Mississippi. You went to Tougaloo for college. You stayed in Mississippi. Why did you decide to stay in Mississippi?
Well, I stayed in Mississippi because I really didn't know much better. That I had wanted to go to also another predominantly Black school in Tennessee. It was called Tennessee State at the time. I think it's now a part of the University of Tennessee. But one of my classmates and I had heard these stories of, partying and people having a great time going to this going to this college. And we both said, we want to go there. We want to go to Tennessee State. And my father said, no, 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 no. And so one of my other teachers, Miss Presley, had gone attended Tougaloo, and I really admired her. I admired her poise, her the way that she comported herself each day, and so not no one else except there was a I graduated in a class of 104 people, and I was the only one that went to Tougaloo. About, let's see, about 75% of my class went on to college. But I decided to go to Tougaloo, and I was the only one who decided to go to this little school, which only with only 600 students, So um, and I chose it because it was the first Black college established in Mississippi. It was a
Hmm.
private Black college. It had an excellent reputation. So I did my background and research on the colleges in Mississippi, since I know that my parents didn't want me to leave the state. They didn't want me to go too far,
Yeah.
far. So I researched it and I decided that that's where I wanted to go. I never visited the campus
Hmm.
at all. I just took it on faith that this was going to be a great place for me. So
And was it?
it was. I mean,
Okay.
Tougaloo, from Mr. Lloyd to Tougaloo, I would say from my upbringing in African American, the Black church,
Hmm.
and from my family and from the school and Mr. Lloyd, Tougaloo is the next thing that I say that defined my life and defined who I am today.
I when I hear stories of the setting out on these paths of academic exploration and all of that, and everything that you're talking about, Dr. Jones-Sneed, again, I think oftentimes we look at the present and we think to ourselves, I could never, or I don't know how it'd be like to live during those times, because I think what we have is the present as our point of reference, and we think about all the things that we currently enjoy at this moment. But like you said, what you knew is what you knew.
Hmm.
And but the fact that 75% of your graduating class went on to college, the fact that people found they still had ambition, they wanted more. So the broader society might have said you can only do this, or you should only be that, or you should only go here, or you should only talk to that person. But within the microcosm of the community, the Black community that you were a part of, it gave you so much more to aspire to be and
Hmm.
to seek after. And I think understanding how the two could coexist
Yeah.
is fascinating.
Yeah. And in fact, when we go back and look at the Black community, historically, I mean, that's the reason why we have, so many Black people going to college and saying, I'm going to make a difference
Hmm.
in my life. And usually the difference was, I want to make a difference because I want to make a difference for my family. I want to make a difference for my community. I want to make a difference for my people. So it was a larger kind of thing, is that
Hmm.
we were never going for your own individual, self.
Hmm.
It was
Right.
always larger than yourself,
Right.
what you were doing. And my father, my church, my school all said this to us, that
Hmm.
you're going out there to represent, this, and that, and it
Yeah.
was all about something else other than ourselves, so.
Mm. When you from Tougaloo, you went on to Northwestern, and from Northwestern, you went on to the University of Missouri Columbia.
Mhm.
Through that trajectory, from the very start, did you always know that you wanted to be a professor? Did you set out to say, this is my goal and this is going to be my path? How did you carve that out?
Well, when I went to Tougaloo, what I wanted to do is I wanted to become a journalism major, because from an early age, I think from when I was 8 years of age, I wanted to write. Because I mean, I grew up as almost an only child, although I have three brothers and a sister. They are so much older than I am, and they were out of the house when I was born. And so I grew up with older parents. And so what I did is I read, 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 read. And so I wanted to write, and I thought that I didn't really know what a journalist did, but I wanted to major in journalism. But when I went to Tougaloo, the one journalism professor was on leave, and he never came back during the 3.5 years that I was at Tougaloo. So I had this, they assigned me this, a person as an advisor who was, his name was Snell. He was a German artist, and Ronald Snell. And Mr. Snell had this very deep accent, and he just allowed me to take anything I wanted to take. And so I just was, as a freshman, I was taking upper level psychology courses and da da da. So for the first 2 years, I just took anything that I wanted to take.
Yeah.
And when I finished my sophomore year, they said to me, he said to me, "Well, now you need to choose." And I said, "Okay." And so I love philosophy. I loved literature, but I didn't like English very much, but I did like literature. I loved sociology, and I liked history. So I finally chose history because there were more people within the history department that I had taken courses from that I really, really liked. And so I chose history,
Hmm.
and kind of went from there. And but if they hadn't ever made me choose, I'm not sure what would have happened, so, but it
And
was
did
great.
you know that you wanted to be a professor?
Well, yes, in the history department, there were three of us, two of my friends and myself made a pact with each other. Tougaloo, although it's a historically Black college, the year that I came to Tougaloo was the first year that we had a Black president. The presidents at the college before all of that time, the hundreds of years before, had all been white, because it had been set up by the American Missionary Society, by the Congregational Church.
Hmm.
And so not only, and 75% of the faculty was also white. And so we didn't have that many Black professors either. And so we made this pact that we were going to get our doctorate, and then we were going to come back and we were going to teach at Tougaloo, because this was during the era of Black Power, Black is beautiful.
Hmm.
Yeah. And so we said, we're going to come back, and we're going to take these jobs, and we're going to be the ones who teach here at Tougaloo.
Yes.
So yeah, I think that in the second semester of my junior year is when we made this pact with each other, that this is what we were going to do. So
Okay. Um, well, gotta ask you this. Did you ever get back to Tougaloo?
no.
Oh.
Um, I just I certainly tried
Hmm.
with one of my favorite professors at Tougaloo, and he really tried to get me back there as well, but things just did not work out one way or the other. But I said to a reporter one time who kind of asked me this question. He asked me, I was sitting over in my office at MCLA, and he said, "Did you ever imagine that she would be sitting here in Western Massachusetts, teaching at this small, liberal arts college, which is predominantly white, with your background from Mississippi?" And I had to think about that because I had never thought about that before. And I said,
Yeah.
no, I never did.
No.
I never thought that this would be where I would be, because so my teaching background is I started teaching at the University of Missouri.
Mm-hmm.
Well, actually, no. I started teaching in the city colleges of Chicago right after I got my master's from Northwestern. And then I taught African American history at Loyola University as well. And then finally went on to the University of Missouri, where I taught women's studies, Black studies. And so, really, I have never taught at a historically Black institution. I've always taught at what would be historically white institutions. And I thought about that, and I said, well, I just have to say God had another plan for me,
Right.
He had a plan that I should be the representation of Blackness in white spaces rather
Mm-hmm.
than, going back to there were other people who, who were doing the job at Tougaloo, and places
Right.
like Tougaloo, God wanted me to be elsewhere.
And to that point, there when we think about some of our goals that we have when we're younger, not all of them pan out. I mean, I think obviously you put in that work, and you and I'm thinking maybe your friends and at the time and colleagues, maybe they had a similar path and maybe achieved what they set out to achieve. But it's a part of sort of like our journey, right? We think it's going to lead one way, and sometimes it can go in a way that is so unimaginable. And that's the beauty of life, right?
Yes,
That
it is.
you
My grandmother said that, she always said to me, she says, man thinks that they can plan stuff, but they don't know it's God who makes the plan, not not man.
yes,
So I mean, I thought about her, when I was answering her that question, and I said, I'm sure grandma would say, yeah, well, God got you doing what he wants you to do.
right.
So,
You're where you are, where you're meant to be.
yes,
And
yeah,
and
yeah.
you have had that impact. Dr. Jones-Sneed, we're just going to take a quick break, and we'll be back in 30 seconds.
Oh, yes!
89.7 WTBR-FM Pittsfield.
Support for WTBR comes from Berkshire Community College. BCC provides access to higher education to everyone in Berkshire County and beyond, offering more than 50 high-quality programs, small class sizes, and an affordable education to help their students of all ages achieve their dreams. At BCC, their middle name is community. And from Sundrini Awnings and Home Improvement. Retractable awnings, retractable screens, gutter and gutter protection systems, commercial awnings, and screen rooms. Customized solutions available. Online at Sandrini.com.
So, for my listeners just tuning in, my guest today is Dr. Frances Jones-Sneed. She's Professor Emeritus of History at Massachusetts College of Liberal Arts, and she's the co-director of the Upper Housatonic Valley African American Heritage Trail. By no means are those the only two things that she does. There's so many things that are attached to this woman here, and we'll get into that. But when you we were just talking a little bit about you sitting in that MCLA office. And you started at MCLA, well, when you moved to the Berkshires back in 1993, and MCLA at that time was known as North Adams State College, and that's when your tenure with the institution first began. Um, Tell me a little bit about how was it teaching history in those early days at the institution?
It was great. It was wonderful. What I have to say is that the history department, when I started there, allowed me to develop courses that I wanted to develop, and that they had taught an African American history course before, but it had lapsed. It was on the book, but nobody taught it. So I taught the African American history course, and I think I developed like a dozen more courses that I wanted to teach. And they allowed me to do so. And so, for when you're teaching in a institution of higher learning like this, I don't think that most of us, especially when we're just starting out, have that, flexibility where we can say to the chairman of the department, I want to teach this and I want to teach that. Usually they have, you have this set course that you have to teach, and then you have to, kind of build until you can teach those courses that you want to teach. It wasn't like that at North Adams States and hence MCLA. And so I really kind of enjoyed the flexibility that I had when I came there. Of course, I had taught probably, I wasn't just starting out when I came to North Adams State. And I think that maybe that's one of the reasons why, that I wasn't just a beginning a professor. And in fact, I started as an associate professor when I came there. And in 3 years, I went on to become a full professor. So, but it was great, and the students were great too. I mean, they seemed that they were very hungry to learn new things, and that's how I got into local history, because because I have to mention my late husband Stephen, who was an administrator, and so I spent a large part of my life kind of following him around for his when he found positions. And so he found a position at Williams College, and that's the reason why we were out here. He was the associate dean. And so we were at Washington State University in Pullman, Washington before that. And I was on faculty there. And so when he got this position, I was very upset because, we had been there about 7 years and I was just getting into my groove there. But every new community, so we came from Missouri to Pullman, Washington. So every new community that I go into, I want to know about who is the Black community. What is the history of this Black community? I did my dissertation on a Black community in Missouri. So then when I went to Washington State, I did the same thing. I wanted to learn about the Blacks in Washington State and in the Northwest. So when we came to the Berkshires, I said, well, what is the history of this little local place? We came from Washington State, where we have the, Cascades and all of the wonderful mountains. And I came here, I visited here in during November, and it was a very gray day. He was already here, and I was back in Washington trying to sell the house. And we flew in, my daughter and I flew in, and I said, where in the heck has he brought us? Because I felt like I was in a bowl, it was foggy, and I looked at it and people start talking about mountains, and I said, where? But it is a place that has really kind of grown on me. And through my students at MCLA, then North Adams State, so we started this local history course. And what I asked them to do was to find out about who were the Blacks in the area. And so that's how I got into looking at African-American history in the Berkshires. They loved it because it was primary research for them. It was just not history from the textbook. It's that they had to really dig in order to come up with these stories. And a lot of them, one of the students is now working at the John F. Kennedy Library. Another one is they're all over the place. They just have gone. Another one is at who works at the National Archives. Their careers just went. And mainly from the kinds of stuff that we did in those little classes that we did. And so when we came to talk about Rachel Fletcher in Great Barrington was called me up and said, I understand that you do some local history. A group of us are trying to get together to get together a brochure on
Mm-hmm.
African Americans in the area. Are you interested? And I said, yes. We went down and there were about 30 of us, and we started just to put together this little brochure and came up with a 250-page book on, African Americans in the Berkshires. And
Mm-hmm.
so that was in 2006 that we published that. We did a tour. And now we're revising that in some way and kind of adding a website and an app so that
Mm-hmm.
people, when they come, they can just pull up their phones and kind of look at it.
Mm-hmm.
So the work goes on, and we're finding new material every day, and
Yeah.
other kind of stuff pops up. And I'm always interested in Blacks in the area who grew up in the area and what was
Mm-hmm.
like in that kind of way. So
Well, I feel like I'm biased in some way because I have a natural love of history. I remember reading about John Hope Franklin. Quick question about him. Did you ever get to talk to him? Did you know him?
oh yes, oh
Oh,
yes. In fact, I had dinner with Mr. Franklin at his home. So yes, he a lovely, lovely man, and just yeah, I can't say enough about John Hope Franklin, which is a lovely, lovely man.
so again, I'm at this point where I'm reading about people who you encountered. So I'm just going to ask another question. In addition to John Hope Franklin, who else, in terms of the history professor all stars of the time, can you drop some more names? Can you drop
Well,
some more names?
drop some more names. Oh, it's amazing. I always tell this wonderful story about Maya Angelou.
Yeah,
That we had Maya to come to speak at the University of Missouri when I was there. And in fact, I've had the honor of meeting three. I love poetry. I love African American poetry, and so I've had the honor of meeting um, um, Maya Angelou, um, let's see, Gwendolyn Brooks,
hmm,
as and Nikki Giovanni, as well as Audra Lloyd. So I've had the pleasure of meeting all of them, and they're so very different in personalities and stuff like
yeah,
that, and just kind of sometimes I was saying to somebody, sometimes when you really really like a person or a star or something like that,
yeah,
sometimes it just doesn't bode well to meet them because
that's true.
they can either explode the myths of what you
Hmm.
actually think about them, or
Hmm.
it can be so great that you would say, "Oh my God!" So some of them were just great, and others were, "Oh, yes." But yes, and of course, Lerone Bennett Jr. was from Mississippi,
Yeah,
and so I got to meet him, and of course, I've met a lot of history people that are just kind of not well known, but they are
yeah.
quite famous within their own fields, with that that. So
Was there a what, because obviously this is, in terms of the way that, with the internet and the ability to communicate instantaneously, it's very different and the channels were different. But how did the network of professors and people who are up and coming and really good at their work, how did everyone stay connected? What did that network look like?
well, through the organizations, there are two major history organizations, the American Historical Society and the Organization of American History, which are the American Historical Association goes back to the early late 1800s actually. But of course, in studying people like Du Bois, um, because of segregation, those associations were kind of closed to Blacks who were in history. And so Du Bois really did not have a kind of a place within that kind of stuff. And so Carter G. Woodson, who is the father of Black History Week and then Black History Month, started this organization called the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. And we call it ASALH. And so that organization is the organization that most Black scholars could come together, meet each other. We knew what each other were doing and stuff like that. So in literature, they had the College Language Association, where people would go and Blacks would go and find out what was going on, and then try to chip away at the white organizations so that we can have an inroads in there. Well, now all of those organizations were kind of open, but I came on board just at the kind of crossroads when people were all already getting in, having some representation in the white societies, but the Black societies were still very, vibrant. And those associations are still very vibrant today, as are fraternities and sororities, which is another way that.
Are you in a sorority, Dr. Jones-Sneed?
Yes, I am. I'm an AKA. So.
I did not know you were an AKA. I did not know that.
Okay, so that was the kind of networking a society that people would be in. I think I got my first job out of the undergraduate school. Before I went to graduate school, I got my first job with a contact from Tougaloo and from AKA or Alpha, so you make those kind of networking kind of things, and I'm just so pleased that that the historically Black institutions, that sororities and fraternities, and those Black associations are still going and still vibrant. Even today, we still need those organizations for Blacks still need those, in order to make sure that we that we count, that we have that kind of entry in some kind of way.
Dr. Jones-Sneed, I think you touched on an important point, and I think for people who may not understand some of the organizations, there's even people who don't necessarily even understand historically Black colleges and universities, and why is there a separate, and why is there this organization, and why is there this other? Can you just talk a little bit about why those things had to come to be in the first place?
Because there was a color line, just as I went to a segregated school because white schools were not open to Blacks in Mississippi, not only in the Mississippi, but all states below the Mason-Dixon line. And even in northern cities, schools were segregated by community, sometimes, and there were even, we look in Boston and, we look at Boston in the 1960s and how South Boston fought against desegregation of their schools. So the same thing happens with organizations, like fraternities and sororities did not accept Blacks or Jews or Catholics. And so separate organizations were set up. Specifically, Blacks set up separate fraternities, or what they call Greek societies. In order to do that, they set up separate historical and literary societies because they would not welcome, into the white societies. And so that's the reason why that was that kind of divide at that point in time. And it's the same thing with Black colleges. In Mississippi, you could only go so far. And if you wanted to be, wanted to do a PhD, if you want to be a lawyer or a doctor, there was no place in Mississippi that you could go to train. And you would have to go outside of the state of Mississippi in order to kind of do that. Just that those societies and institutions still exist and work in the same way that they did then. I think it says something about our society, that our society has changed. It's changed, but still we have a long way to go in that kind of way. I know my husband was working at Williams, and Williams is one of the one of the best small liberal arts colleges in the country. But some of the Black students and students of color really struggle. They had to fight to get into Williams, but then when they get there and they want to be pre-med, there's this washout course that they have to go through. And 95% of them wash out of that pre-med course, and they have to decide to do something else, So, even within the institutions themselves,
Mm-hmm.
there's still something where in a Black institution, you would have, I just remember science is not my background at all, but I waited to my senior year to take my science requirement, and I took chemistry of all things. Why I did that, I have no idea. But I remember taking an 8 o'clock chemistry course, going to a 9 o'clock lab, and then going to a 10 o'clock class, the same class, just so that I would not lower my GPA, And along the way, tutored by my professor as well as one of the students who was a chemistry major in that kind of way. So those kinds of things were open to me because they saw that you want to do this, there's just no washout kind of thing. If you have if you said that this is what you want to do, there's going to be somebody there who's going to help you do this whole
Mm-hmm.
thing. That's not true
Yeah.
for us at all institutions. So
When you say a washout, is that like a course that sort of sifts through, like, it makes sure that, like, it has, it's very rigorous, and it, it's so hard that if you're able to hang on to the end, then you move forward. Is that what
yes, yes,
washout course is? Okay.
yes, that's a washout course. And you know and I don't think I'm saying the course should be rigorous, because we want the best
Yes.
people going on into medicine and stuff like that. But I'm saying that some students in that class have the kinds of ends that others don't, that
Mm-hmm.
they do have tutors, they do have help,
Mm-hmm.
they do
Mm-hmm.
have the assistance in order to,
Yeah.
they have the study groups that others, are not
Right.
welcome to, or, so
Right.
there's still something going on there
Yeah.
so why is it that, 75 or 80% of the students of color wash out of that class? I mean,
Yeah.
that seems really strange to me.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
and it's just not
Yeah.
true it's not just true at a Williams, but
Yeah.
we'll see it at other places as well. But you go to, say, Xavier
Yeah.
in New Orleans, who's known for graduating, doctors of color,
Yes.
and so how can they do it,
Yeah.
where 95% of the class, the beginning class of people actually make it to the second class, where
Yeah.
how do they do it when, you
Well,
know?
it's interesting because I went to, as they call, a PWI. I went to a
Hmm.
PWI, but my husband went to a HBCU,
Hmm.
and he went to Virginia State, and he
Okay.
talks a lot about the way that you're treated at a HBCU, that there is this familial environment where it's looked on as there is this investment in you, not just as a student, but you are connected, you are interwoven into this
Yes.
network of
Hmm.
bigger, and that
Yes.
network is community, and
Yes.
they know that that investment, that the learning that you are attaining at the institution will be for the betterment of
Yeah.
the community. So there is a deeper investment. At my school, I loved my school, but I don't know if we definitely had very different stories. I mean, I was a commuter, I didn't dorm, and I don't necessarily, I didn't have that touchy feely kind of warm feeling. It was far from it. I mean, it was literally the whatever I put in, and that was it. And so very different experience. But what you're saying, definitely it makes sense. And it makes me also think about potential, right? We all sort of have, I call it the raw potential. It's like dough. And dough is dough, but what you do with that dough helps to determine what that dough will look like once it goes in the oven, right? You know, if you do not chill it and you do not do certain things, and it might not have the same effect as if you were to do all the right things and make sure that your final product looks how it you would want it to look. So it's what we do with the potential, and sometimes that potential in some cases is able to be nurtured in different ways.
Yes.
Yeah.
And in fact, Tougaloo was an extension of the kind of community that I grew up with, in that I was coming from a really tightly formed African American community, and Tougaloo was another kind of community. It was like home. It was family, and where from the president on down to the person who was doing the janitorial work, everybody knew everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the right hand always knew what the left hand was doing. And sometimes you may not like that, but there was accountability, and
Yes.
sometimes there is no accountability for some of our for some of us in situational cultures
Yeah.
that we don't understand, or they don't understand us, right?
Right.
That there's not going to be somebody who's going to look over there, see that something's going on, walk over and say, what's going on here, or push us in one way or the other that we need to go, so sometimes we need that kind of community and that kind of push where, I mean, I don't have any problem, I have never had any problems working within PWIs. And I know somebody was saying, you grew up in a Black society, you went to historically Black schools. How do you function outside of that? And I said, just fine, because what they gave me and what I have is a sense of myself and who I am.
Right. That's right.
Where I can do it any place I am, because I know who I am, so
that's right.
So that's the kind of thing that that Tougaloo and my community kind of gave me. And I think that that's something that some of our kids don't have, especially sometimes in the public school systems.
Yeah.
We lose people we lose kids who are very, very bright.
Yeah.
Because we don't understand, the essence of exactly, how we need to approach them in one way or the other. And it's just so sad to me, that, my high school was like No Child Left Behind. I just,
And your high school, which had little resources, right?
Yes.
It's so much that, and that's the thing. It wasn't because you could have had an excess of resources, but you had little resources. But what you had in abundance was the care and the commitment to make sure that whatever you had in front of you, even if it was 2 pages, you're going to make sure that we maximize the content from those 2 pages. You were going to soak it all in. And there's that right there is the that I call it the secret formula. That is how so many communities thrive, because it wasn't because they had everything. They didn't.
No,
they didn't have everything. If anything, they lacked.
Yes.
But in spite of the lack,
Yes.
there was this this fervent desire to make sure that next generation was going to be better. And so,
it's just like our mother's kitchens. My brothers, who are so much older than me, they always loved my mom, and I love my mom too. But they would say that my mother, that she could get in the kitchen and with little or nothing, she could make something that would just be, a 5-star course as far as they were concerned, because she knew how to take a little and really do a lot with it, And I mean, I just think that that's one of the kinds of, strengths of the African American culture and family, that, and I think that goes on, with the institutions that, you're not my child, but you are, that, everybody is somebody's child. And so you have to take it and look after that child's, and the whole point of it is to pass it on, right? I give to you, but you don't have to give back to me. You just pass it on. And when you get an opportunity to pass it on to somebody else, you do so, because that is what you're supposed to be doing. So
Yes. Yes. That's a gem right there. When Dr. Jones-Sneed, when we think about the I call it the Berkshire All-Stars, the key history, the names that we hear a lot, right? We immediately names like obviously W.E.B. Du Bois, Elizabeth Freeman, Agrippa Hull, James Grant. Who am I missing? Who am I missing? Who am I missing
Oh,
from Reverend Samuel T. Harrison?
yes, Samuel Harrison. Yes, of
That's
course.
right.
And Agrippa
Um,
Hall.
That's right. When we think these are names that we hear a lot, and I in a moment I want you to talk a little bit about your love of W.E.B. Du Bois. But are there others that in the research over all these years that have also the stories? I mean, there are countless stories. Were there any surprises along the way?
There were, just looking at the Harrison family, period. The Harrison family just was just a prolific family. Reverend Harrison, of course, was, the all-star, starting from an enslaved person and going all the way to being the chaplain of the 54th in that way. But he and his wife Ellen, who doesn't get talked about a whole great deal, but she was a support partner to him, and that she was a seamstress, and she was a small entrepreneur herself that helped carry that family, because just being a minister at a church, you didn't make that much money, so
Hmm.
he had to have a second job as a cobbler, and that's the reason why he has a cobbler shop at his house. And she had, and she was a seamstress because she was a mother of 13 children, although I think only 6 of them, came of age. But they had to make do for their family in that way. His son George became a barber, and he was a wonderful violinist. His granddaughter Florence Edmonds was a public health nurse, one of the first in the Berkshires to do so. When Pittsfield Hospital, the old Pittsfield Hospital, she could not take her nursing courses there, so she had to go to New York in order to get her nursing certificate there. But came back to the Berkshires and became the kind of public health nurse. And of course, her daughter, Ruth Hill, became, a wonderful oral historian, who told her mom's story in that kind of way. So just look at the generations, that come down. And so I like to look at the generations in the Harrison family and exactly what happened there. One of his daughters graduated the first in her class at Pittsfield High School. Do we know that? So we look at it, and we just see, that, the start of Head Start here in Berkshire County was started by a Black woman, Dorothy Amos. So, we can just go on and on with the little stories about, people who have actually made a kind of impact with him, being such, only 3 to 4% of the population. That's what blows my mind. 3 to 4% of the population, but making such impact,
Hmm.
not only within the Black community, but within, the county or the state. We look at that and we say, wow, what happens there? James Vanderzee becoming the premier photographer for the Harlem Renaissance. And here he is growing up in Lenox, getting his first camera there. He grew up in a family where he really wanted to be a violinist, because he was a great violinist, and that's what he wanted to be, as a musician, but he
Hmm.
couldn't find his place when he went to New York. And so because he, went to a photography studio, I mean, is another kind of thing, like God wanted you to do that. His sister also was a really kind of great musician as well, and started in Black film in New York City, and so that family alone, you can kind of look at that and kind of what happened. So yeah, we have Du Bois, and Du Bois is wonderful, and I studied Du Bois, but there are just so many other people here in the, Black people in the Berkshires that made their marks, and and we say, I mean, same thing, I guess people say, how did you do that? But they say,
Yeah.
"Oh, yeah, how did you do that given the kind of society?" Because Mrs. Edmonds talks about Pittsfield and how rigid Pittsfield was, along the color line, and how, some people didn't want her to, some whites didn't want her to come into their homes, and, he said, Pittsfield, why would they be doing that? Pittsfield at a time that wanted to set up a separate school for Blacks, but the Black community protested and said, no way, so we're talking about Pittsfield, here in Western Massachusetts, and Massachusetts, they're supposed to be, the most liberal one of the most liberal states in the country. We're not talking about Mississippi. And so, so when I find out these little tidbits, I'm saying, whoa, this is just absolutely amazing, that these people who lived here at this point in time, what they did. And, we're talking about, Stephanie Wilson, and, graduating from Taconic, and, now, is a NASA star.
Yeah.
We have, federal judges, coming from the area, I said, yeah, this is amazing. I don't see white folks doing this, but forgive me.
So I just want to thank you, Dr. Jones-Sneed, for being here. We're going to have you on again. To my listeners, thanks so much for listening to Backstory. Let's hear it on WTBR-FM Pittsfield. You have been listening to this show, and I am Roberta McCulloch-Dews. So I just want to thank you again, and I hope you have a great day.